Welcome. I'd like to say thank you to Kendall first for joining us with Ken PKU Plus, just to speak about his adult journey with PKU and coming back to diet as part of our Drive to Thrive. So hi, Kendall. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and get a chance to kind of talk about my PKU journey from many years ago.
Awesome. Yeah.
um,
Go ahead, Kendall. I just say I met you at a conference down at the MPKUA, so I thank them for that. But I'd like you to just go ahead and start sharing your story, hun.
yeah, so we did meet at the NPKUA conference in Washington State, I guess it was. And so that's when we first met and we kind of connected. And you told me you're with Canada. But anyway, so I'm actually 56 years old. Um, and I am from the United States, the state of Maryland. And I was born in 1966. And back then, only 14 states actually did the newborn screening. They started in my state, 65, and I was born in 66. So I believe I was the first one that tested positive for PKU through the heel stick test. And back then, there was very, very little known about PKU. Um, there's several interesting stories about that day. Um, you know, um, back then, I wasn't actually diagnosed until about 21 days old. The reason I say that is Maryland had a law that by the 14th day you had to have your uh, heel stick test. And I was actually went home, and on that 14th day, we went to, I believe it was the health department, or no, I'm sorry, the hospital, and had the heel stick test done. And of course, there's no internet, there's no cell phone, so it took a little bit of time. And actually, on the 21st day, my mom was followed by her primary care, not her G GYN doctor. He called her and said, "Bring Kendall in immediately." And this was in the afternoon. And so we came in late that evening, and I was about 21 days old, and they did another confirmation to confirm. And they said, yes, he is positive, he has PKU. And actually, they sent a sheriff to our house, lights and sirens, with the only formula of the time, Pendolac, which came in about a gallon can of like a paint can. And the story is that he gave lights and sirens to our house, and they had called and said, "Don't feed him." Right? Your idea. And so, anyways, it was a journey from there. Um, not a lot was known back then. And keep in mind, in the 60s, we did not have the information of protein and all the nutrition on the back of boxes and cans, that sort of thing. So no one really knew how much protein and that sort of thing was in anything. And so basically, Lofenolac was the formula, and it was about 90% of the nutrients needed. And I'm slowly, as I'm learning more and more about the whole process and everything. And so the county, the health department, sent a dietitian and a registered nurse to my house once a week for the first whole years, or for at least the first year. And there was no apps or anything to track your fee and that kind of thing. My mom literally wrote everything I ate from the first day I was born, diagnosed, all the way up to at least 6, 7 years old. And they would come to the house once a week, and they would go over my diet records and give her some more ideas of what I could eat and the formula. And they would draw my blood then. And so I was followed by Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. And again, no one knew what to do. And so it was a lot of learning through the years. And I recently learned that, they were, when they look at things, they were trying to, um, not how much protein, but it was, they looked at 1 tablespoon of formula compared to your weight. So it was formula, calories, and 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 phenolphthalein, and that ratio compared to your weight. So it, like, for instance, I believe it was a quarter of a tablespoon if you were from 3 to 7 years old. So say you weighed 20 pounds, you would multiply that by a quarter cup. And that's how much formula you were allotted for the day. So it wasn't really like counting the actual protein and that sort of thing. So basically, the normal diet for me was the formula. And I would have, here is a tablespoon of green beans, here's a quarter tablespoon of beets. That was dinner. That was it. So we did not have like Cambridge Foods that's in the States now. We didn't have that. And the formula was extremely expensive. Um, in 1966, that in the 60s, like the average, from what I've heard, the average hourly rate was $1.25 an hour. My formula per month was $385. I don't know how that worked in Canadian, but so it's very expensive. And so there were different agencies that helped my parents pay for it. My mom did sewing and did everything she could to earn extra money and that sort of thing. Coupons, everything you can think of, to give me the best normalcy growing up. Um, I actually came off diet, and I thought it was 11, right? Because back then, when you hit puberty was when they took you off. And I learned in going, I've gotten some of my medical records and looking through a lot of stuff. Um, I learned that um, around 6 years old, they wanted to a put me in a clinical trial. And the clinical trial was Hopkins was taking half of their people with PKU, taking them off diet, and the other leaving on diet. What happens, because they know around adolescence, 11 or 12, everyone was coming off. That was kind of the idea that. And so at that time, what had happened was I started school and I chewed a lot, like a lot. I
Well,
wasn't really.
you mentioned tablespoons of food, and I know I've heard before from adults that hunger was a huge piece of the problem with the PKU diet back in the early 60s and 70s. I'm assuming you experienced the same.
Oh yes. So my mom told me a story when I was 2 years old, that I had a bowel movement, and the doctor happened to be in the room and saw my poop. It was extremely bright green, fluorescent looking. And he stopped, got up, brought, my mom said, 50 doctors into the room. Now, he wasn't talking directly to her. She's just sitting there, and was telling her she's starving her kid. This is starvation food. You will never see this in America because this only happens in a third world country, right? Understand the psychological effect it had on my mom, that she's like, oh God, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So it was tough back then, and there wasn't much known at the time. It's interesting because back then we felt that the brain fully developed around adolescence, so that was kind of rationale to let someone with PKU off diet at that time frame. Well, we know that the brain kind of gets to its fullest capacity in 25. Women, I say, is 20 because they're always smarter, but us, we're a little slower. But anyways, so we know that now, that it's through technology and that sort of thing, being able to do imaging and that sort of thing. So That's why now what's preferred treatment, diet for life. That's what they kind of the normal standard. So basically, what had happened was my mom tried to make things as I started school, I started cheating wrong. And around third grade, we moved to a new school system. And this is when this clinical trial kind of came into play. And the decision was made that he's changing schools. Let's not have him go through the psychological and social part of it. So he'll have new friends, new area. He won't have to explain his PKU. So let's just go ahead and allow him to go off. And so I continued to go to Hopkins for my PKU treatment. And what that normally looked like was I would see a psychologist and we would do IQ tests in the morning. And then right before lunch, I'd go see the PKU doctor and we would talk about my PKU treatment. Um, how are you doing? Da, 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 that sort of thing. And then we would go home. And it got to the point where it was like every 6 months, every year, and even got further as I got older. Um, when I hit adolescence, it wasn't really when I went there. Now, remember, Hopkins is a hospital, and I don't misunderstand anything I say. They are amazing. They're wonderful people. I think that for them, I'd be in a much different place. But it became more about, hey, come meet this person who's 16 with PKU, because all they've ever seen is little babies. So it wasn't always necessarily about, but what were they going to do, right? It's either go back on diet, but yeah, no, I wasn't willing to, right? And so,
Sorry, just to interrupt. When you say you were talking about your treatment when you were there, your treatment was not treating. Like you weren't on formula, you were not measuring any foods. Is that
yeah,
correct?
I was off diet
Yeah.
from 8. So I came totally off diet by 8 and meat, everything. So, um, and then to get and so remember I was born in 66. So as I got into adulthood, I was going by myself, early 20s, and it was like, oh, we'll see you in a couple of years. And so there wasn't any true in that transition process into adulthood. I think that's something as society, as the PKU community can work on is the transition process from, hey, I'm a teenager, I got mom and dad on my back. Now let's move into adulthood and let them handle it, be more self-sufficient. But that's also plays into the parents' role now growing up to teach them as they come up. And in that whole, how do we do that? And so there was no follow up even from the clinic. So I kind of just felt like once I hit my early 20s, I lived like I didn't even have it, wasn't even a thought for a long time. Um, Around 1996, I believe, I got a phone call and letter from my clinic from Hopkins saying, hey, it's been some time since we saw you. We've learned that it's best for people to be on diet for life. We'd like to talk to you about getting back on diet. But I was really excited. I'm like, you know what? Maybe that's a really good thing. Maybe that's something I should do. I'm getting older, da da da. And the dietitian was like, hey, I'll have you come to a PKU picnic. And all the vendors will be there. You can try different formula. I said, there's more. What about lefenolac? Where's that at? Oh, I don't know if that's still right. It was yours. But so they have orange, they have this, they have that. And so I was like, oh, and oh, by the way, here's all these different foods that you can have and all this stuff. So we go around. I like this formula. This is pretty cool. I think I can eat this. Da, da, da. And I was willing to put the work in to learn how to measure and all this stuff. And even went and bought a scale. And I'm ready. My wife at the time was also on board. And I guess about that time, I don't know if I had all 4 kids yet, but I had 4 kids growing up. I mean, I raised 4 kids. And so I had kids and everyone was going to be supportive. And then I get there and they turn around and they say, well, just for your formula, it's $1,600. That doesn't include your foods and your insurance doesn't cover it.
Right. So there's a few differences there with Canada and the States. One of which, I don't know if it's because you were in that trial when you were 6, that they kept your records, that they could go back to you. Part of what the problem up here is that they were discharged from care. There's no record of who they are. So part of our struggle will be finding out who those adult patients are that don't even know they maybe were or need to be adult patients. So that's one difference that we have between us and the States. Just want to point that out because of the nature of the video being posted. The other thing is the finances. As a Canadian, I feel for you. That was probably my biggest takeaway from that meeting we were at, was the struggles you guys have when it comes to insurance. I'm not saying Canada's perfect. I'm not saying we don't have provinces that could be improved, but there is coverage for every adult and every child to have formula across the country, and food for most. I can't say all, we have a few things to work on, but most provinces have coverage for food for all children and most adults. So there's just a couple provinces that we'll say they're a
They
little closer.
so some of the insurance companies would cover the formula for children up to a certain age. And I literally had insurance companies tell me, why should you go on the phone, right? And so that gets into the Medical Nutrition Act that they have, that they're trying to pass right now through Congress, that will cover not just PKU, but all rare disease and
Yeah,
metabolic disorders.
absolutely. So important. So I'm assuming that that was a stumbling block in your journey.
So I did work with the dietitian for a little bit. She gave me samples and she did the best she could do. She's like, well, let's modify it. Let's try and work on just being a vegetarian. Now, understand, I'm used to steak, I'm used to everything. And then you're going to tell me, okay, I'm going to have a tomato sandwich or carrots and celery for lunch. Hmm. And so there's part of this got into psychological, right? Because you have this motivation to do it, but yet you don't have the support per se, as far as having the stuff you need in place to be successful, get back on them. And at that time, I was working construction, and I was so weak. Stuff that I did all the time, I couldn't just pull things that make things connect, and I just was so weak and stuff, and it got made fun of. Like, haha, why are you eating celery, carrots? Like, come on, man, you need to go get some. And people want to great give me a hamburger, but you don't have any money. I got you. No, you don't understand. So there was that of it, and then you're starving. So then you eat something that's high in protein, then the guilt and shame plays in, and you beat yourself up. Why can't I do the matter with so mmany other people have done it? And so there's that part of it too. And so basically it just faded away.
Now
And
tell
I
me,
just,
we're going to get back to, again, the supports are different. So I want to encourage adults seeing
yeah,
this video that supports are now different. And
most,
I would hope that they would be more supported and that you were here to help as well as Camp PKU. But just looking at what you were experiencing then, whether it was before you were called to come back or when you were struggling to try to come back, what were your physical, like what were you noticing day to day that now you can look back and say, those were high levels? That's why I needed to come back.
so I don't believe that early, because in 96, I was not that old. I don't think that the real problems didn't occur until late 30s, early 40s. And what I mean by that is I mean, and I look at it um, as the fog got extremely heavy. And so I do believe at that time that I was having some type of, like, maybe even when I was trying to get on diet, like the focus wasn't as good as it could concentrate, uh, like, but it wasn't prominent, right? And I believe that in that time, you don't really know.
Right. I've heard that a lot.
Yeah, that you don't know. And I see that the fee buildup is just gradually increases until it hits pretty bad. And so what I experienced was around my 40s is I actually would get Maddie hard with focusing, completing tasks, all those kinds of I would talk to someone and not make sense. We would talk for an hour and I have not made a point. And I wouldn't be aware of it at that time. I now can see it, but back then I didn't realize it. I thought we had a great conversation. This is great. I just talked to Tanya, da, da, da. Man, it's cool, right? But yet I made no sense. And you don't always see it. I did actually start to get the musty stuff, which I thought was interesting. And so it just slowly got worse. And you don't necessarily see it. So someone who's off diet, it's going to be really hard for you to recognize how high your fee is because you think you're fine. Nah, in that cause conflicts in relationships, uh, kids, parenting, all those all areas of your life, and then work, right? If you can't complete stuff, why would I keep you? If it takes you longer, why should I keep you? I worked for my father at the time, so I wasn't going to get fired, right? So I always had a job, so that wasn't really an issue per se, as far as employment was concerned. So at that time, I actually moved to Missouri. Earlier, um, and we attempted to go in thinking that coverage was better there. Right, and well, they pay for formula. Let's move over there. Blah, blah. So we moved out west for a while. That kind of fell apart, and didn't really know how to navigate how to get back on diet then or clinic because I just didn't know. I was from the East Coast. And so after 4 or 5 years, we moved back to Maryland and things slowly got worse. And my wife at the time was happened to work for NIH in Bethesda, Maryland. And she was a research coordinator. And she
And
was an RN.
just for Canadians who may not know, NIH is the National Health Institute, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. National Institute of Health. And so she worked there, and in her spare time, she was just looking through different clinical trials that were up for PKU. Because from studying medicine, she knew where someone who's totally off diet, where they could end up, I should say. And so she came across a clinical trial called PEG-PAL. Today, it's known as Palynziq. And she made a copy of it, brought it home, and said, "What do you think about this?" And sure, I'll try it. And so the closest location to me in this Maryland was New Jersey, which is like 3, 4 states up north. It's 126 miles to Cooper Hospital in Camden, New Jersey. So in September of 2013, I actually went up there and we talked about like what the expectations are, side effects, that sort of thing. So they kind of explained it in person, the clinical trial, signed some paperwork, da da da. So I actually didn't physically like start the injection for PEG-PAL at the time, which is now Palynziq, until January 15, 2014 was the day I first injected. And of course, they did a fee level when I started, and my fee was 38, which I don't know how you all measure it, 23, I believe. 2,300.
Yeah, some of the clinics measure the same. So they would understand those numbers. Other clinics measure in micromoles, which is what I'm used to. So yeah, 2,300. And the expectation for most clinics is 120 to 360, just to give those listeners an idea. Some clinics allow up to 600 for adults.
Yes. Um, so of course I was extremely high. And so I started the peg pal trial and it took some time. I had, side effects, and it wasn't until about a year in to the trial that um, my fee level actually dropped. And um, it's crazy because I still vividly remember that day because the normal clinic visit for the trial was I come in and I would see the doctor because the doctor's time is valuable, which I understand. And then the dietitian would come over, go over my clinic, my food records, that sort of thing, talk to me, boom, leave. Hour and a half, maybe if that. It's not super long. And so I walk in, and it's real loud. People are laughing. They're smiling. Oh, the doctor's here and my dietitian's there. All the ladies who's ever been part of the trial are there. They're all giggling, carrying on. And so I do the normal routine, go sit in the room, and I sit down, but something different happens. The doctor and the dietitian came in at the same time. And they shut the door and they said, we got to tell you something. All right. I'm like, these people acting really weird. What's going on? And they go, Kendall, your fee level dropped to zero from 38 to zero. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, isn't that exciting? Ah. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And remember, I drove 126 miles to get there, about an hour and a half, depending on how fast I drove. And so I'm driving home by myself. And I started thinking, my fee is zero. Ooh. It still chokes me up that I lived a life with fee level. And this actually worked. And the way I explain it is that the fog is lifted, that I see things clearly, that I'm more consciously aware. I understand my decisions. I'm able to complete things. And it's because of love. And I know that. But that day, just driving home, I started bawling. God, I'm actually, what's that? So, that was about a year and a half into the study. And, we like anything, PKU management isn't something, one time you hit a goal, boom, you're done. No, you got to continue to manage it. And for me, it got into learning to eat appropriately and healthy, right? An off diet, but a lot of my diet consisted of fast food. So I was drinking a pack of soda a day. Oh, cans of Coke. Oh, whole 12. And so for me, it was learning how to eat healthy, how to eat properly. And so actually, that was when I had been at 40 milligrams for about a year before my fee actually dropped. So the idea that a lot of people think I'm going to go jump on Palynziq in 6 months, I'll give it 6 months time, is ridiculous. It's not going to happen. It takes time. Sometimes some people have been even longer before it works, but when it works, it works. And that's what's interesting. So what I think is kind of interesting about Palynziq is it doesn't matter if you're off diet, you're on Kuvan, fully restricted diet, when you start, you continue what you're doing. And once it kicks in, that's when your doctor works with you and your dietitian to make changes. Because the way that I understand it, Palynziq is um, it's foreign material that you're adding into your body, and your immune system fights against it. But once it accepts it, it eats up the fentanyl. And then there's a weird transition that happens. And for me, it wasn't that hard because I'd been eating regular food. So it was more eating healthy for me. But for a lot of people, um, especially who have maybe been on diet most of their lives or semi-controlled, um, to learning to actually understand to eat protein. Like there's a switch where now all of a sudden this doctor tells you, you need to eat some protein, go eat some nuts, eat some yogurt, go eat cheese. Huh? Eat some meat? You kidding me? Right.
Yeah,
So it's like,
I have heard that there's a bit of an identity crisis sometimes for people to go through that transition. But again, there are supports that will help with all of that. I also want to note that uh, I understand that this is your clinical trial journey with
mhm,
Palynziq. I don't want to speak to the way it'll be handled in Canada. Palynziq is now approved for use in Canada. It's not yet used in clinics, but it's a process. We're working on getting there, and the clinics will help those patients through with whatever the process will be for them. I do understand, like you say, it can take a long time for that reaction to for the body to accept it and give us that result. Also wanted to mention you are classic PKU. You had
right,
tried Kuvan, and after 2 weeks, they established that you had zero response on Kuvan.
right.
That gives a bit of a light to those patients that are looking at the fact that they didn't work for Kuvan, but that Palynziq may still be an option for
It,
them.
yeah.
Um,
And go ahead.
no, that's okay. Go ahead.
Um, and so um, one of the things that is really interesting is that, you know, your identity of who you are as a person gets changed, right? You've always been that person that carries the formula, drinks your formula, has that weird diet, da da da. And so now all of a sudden, it's not really about your identity, but it's about your self acceptance of it is okay to eat these foods because you've been told by mom and dad, the doctor, the dietitian, your whole family, everyone in your community, he can't have this. Now all of a sudden it's okay. So there's this psychological change that has to happen. That yes, it is okay if I eat that. I will be okay. But then there's an interesting thing because I know some people who are can eat whatever they want, but they face texture problems with different foods. They don't like meat, even though they're allowed to, because the texture feels weird. Maybe it's seafood, crabs, that sort of thing. They've never had that before. Once you pass that, hey, it's okay. And now all of a sudden, when you go in a restaurant, you're not looking for where's the vegetable at the whole menu open. Like I have choices, which becomes kind of freaking cool, you
It
know?
absolutely.
I,
I think it'd be
yeah,
very cool. The other side of it is that the world accepts vegan and vegetarian a lot more readily than it did in the past. The grocery store is already giving us
huge.
more options. So for those that can't manage the texture or the taste or the thoughts behind meat, we have the tofus and alternative options that still are high in protein. So there's that figuring out what's going to work for each person.
And then it gets the mindset into, okay, am I in what I'm feeling now? Is this low femto? Has my feed dropped too low? And that gets into an individual thing. I have a friend, Matt Munger. He actually feels comfortable at zero. He feels totally fine with it. I've had other people say I feel more comfortable at a 2 or a 3, right? And they might say, no, I just kind of have a headache. I kind of feel off when my levels are below 1. And so it's also individual. So you can't say, oh, below 1 is bad, right? So what is normal be, right, for someone without PKU? Below 1 to like what, 1.5, I believe it is.
Yeah.
I'm not 100,
Yeah,
somewhere
I'm just
around
doing the
there.
math there in my head. But yeah, I think it's like 30 to 60. So 1 to 2.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, so does that mean if I'm at less than 1, that means I'm in the normal range?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. It's been something that um has been a huge change for me. Um, and I think that one of the things that you need to understand is that person who's off diet, who might be struggling with their low pro diet, um, they get on something and it kicks in and it actually works. For me, it was Palynziq, but whatever the treatment is, that I know when that person's going to change, how they interact is going to change. There's going to be an increase. And look, this is just some, and I got to be careful because I don't want to make claims that aren't true. But I know for myself, like not being able to regulate emotions well has greatly improved, which brought up my um, self-esteem, my ability to say no to people. No, sorry, because I think that's important. And then what happens is that changes dynamics in the relationships, especially those very close to you. Oh, I'm divorced and remarried since I've been on. Is it because of pound sake? No. Well, it's because of B, I believe, and the changes I went. You understand what I mean? But I'm not blaming the marriage separation and everything on just PKU. There's a whole lot of other stuff that doesn't need to be discussed. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
what So I think that the person changes different levels. I think self-esteem really does change. Can I make a claim on a label? No. That's just kind of some of the things um,
And when you say
and
change, you refer to improved.
yes. So what I mean by that is memories changes, your ability to focus, complete tasks. Um, and think about this, right? You drive down a country road and you're driving, the fog is just starting to come in, and all of a sudden you're 2 miles down the road and you can't see anything in front of you. And you keep driving, and then all of a sudden the fog slowly lifts and it's totally. That's kind of my journey. Is that represents my journey. Now I can see the pond over to the far left. I can see the pigs over in the pasture and the horses, that sort of. Before, all I could see is the yellow lines in the middle of the road. And so I think someone's awareness of life, of everything increases.
And I know
Um,
we've talked briefly in the past about ADHD behaviors. And many adults say yes, they absolutely feel that ADHD was a piece of their pie growing up. Did you experience that? Do you still experiencing that? Is it in varying degrees?
yes. So I think that ADD, ADHD um, are symptoms partly due part of PKU. And I don't think we always focus on the mental health side of the PKU. And that to me, I think especially as you get more control levels, you're able to more see it more brightly. Wow. Yeah, I don't really have, like, I noticed, like, I can't do this. I don't, like, those things kind of become more prominent and they're more noticed. Where when you're in the fog and you don't necessarily see the behaviors that you're doing, and it's becoming more consciously aware of yourself and your thinking and behaviors. So if I can control my thinking, my behaviors, I'm going to have a better outcome. And so for me, actually, it within the trial, they referred me to go be evaluated, and I do have ADD. And yes, I do take medications. I kind of wish that it would have been addressed much younger. And we spoke about this. I might have been a little bit better in school if I could have sat still, right? So, um, and I think parents get really terrified about that. Oh, giving a kid a medic? No, it won't. Getting it's getting the brain back into balance, and that's okay. And one of the things I see a lot of is parents blame everything on PKU. There can be other things going on. Yeah, the kid has PKU. It's the same thing as co-occurring disorder, right? I got this and this and this going on at the same time. I got to treat all of them.
Yeah, and whether or not the symptoms of ADHD are a result of the PKU, the wiggling in their seat is a result of the ADHD. Like there has to be that subdivide. And I mean, we're living it, which is why we've discussed it. We're living it with our son as well. So I get that piece of the pie, and yeah, it's tough. In closing, though, Kendall, because I don't want to keep you too late here, we are nearing dinner time. In closing, someone listening to this video who is, we're going to say they're off diet, they have been out of clinic for quite some time, and they are not really sure whether or not they need to look at coming back to diet or reaching out to somebody. What's your final thoughts on that? Just to throw that last little tidbit at you without any preparation.
Don't wait until it's.
Pardon me?
I said, don't wait until it's
Too late. Yeah.
because I think that, you know, quite honestly, and I'm on the older spectrum of people alive with PKU, and I know that. I think that there are treatments out there that can work for everyone. Okay, if Palynziq doesn't work for you, that's okay. They're always coming up with things. And being connected and looking at just getting back engaged with your clinic. Um, I know I'm in the state, the National PKU Alliance is huge to have resources for people. I'm actually on the board for the Maryland Alliance of PKU and Families, and we're always, I think it's about connection. I think that, and I've told you this before, it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years ago that I ever met it. And except for maybe a baby here and there in the clinic, but I mean, actually know someone to have conversation. We have, I don't care if you're in Canada, Australia, wherever you are, there is a connection that you will have with that person that it's amazing because to know that someone else has gone through what you've gone. But reach out. I would, you know, I'm in social media. You can find me if you just need someone to talk to. Even if you're a stranger, that's okay. I'm always here. Um, and and quite honestly, it's kind of scary to think about it going back because all of a sudden I can't do diet. Well, okay. Well, let's see what's available. What can help you get better? Um, and I think for me, for the interactions I've had with people who've been off diet, I think that there is a fear of going back because of the guilt and pain that could be attached with going back to food. The fear of being told that what I've been doing for however long has been wrong, that I'm a bad person. I think that that's something that clinics and doctors and people in the healthcare system, even pharmaceutical companies, need to be consciously aware of what you say and come alongside them and let them know that you're here for them. And whatever that looks like, if you choose not to, that's your decision. However, it can have some going untreated for long periods of time can have significant brain problems. it can cause brain damage. People,
And I see people on the spectrum of mildly affected by not being on diet to quite affected by not being on diet. There is a range, and I'm not, and I would hate to think that anyone is shamed by any medical professional, but I don't think you're wrong. I think that's a definite fear and a potential reality. But I would hope if that's the case that you're also reaching out to peers. With your permission, Kendall, I'll find out from you what you're comfortable with. We'll put in the description of the YouTube clip a way of reaching you, whatever way you feel most comfortable in doing that. I'll also have down there on how to people can contact with Camp PKU so that we can be a support. Our ultimate goal is to have people back into a clinic that they're comfortable with, getting the help they need, but that might take some time getting them comfortable to even take that step. The first step is getting connected and getting educated on how and why to come back.
yeah, and what's really cool is there's so many options out there. I mean, there's not just Kuvan, there's just not Palynziq, there's just not diet, there's LNAs, there's other things. Oh, there might be a home feed monitor in the near future, very near. So, wow, like then I can really be, dang, that's why I'm acting crazy because my fees are, and you can then make alter your diet and do things to improve or, so I'm really excited for the future of PKU and what might be happening. So I hope that my little journey, my little story, help people just to see things from different perspectives. Um, you're not alone.
Yeah, I really appreciate you talking with us today and taking the time to address it, because I do think that coming back to care and back to the community is so important for people who have either been discharged from care or chose to leave. I know we hear that it's, there's lots of reasons, hunger, unpalatable foods, a lot of that has changed. A lot of therapy options have changed. A lot of knowledge is out there now. So fingers crossed
Yes,
that we can help at least one person in getting back to their journey, but hopefully many more.
yes, most of.
So thank you again, Kendall.
Welcome. Thank you.
And I'll let you know once this is done.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.